Confessions of an Ex-Satanist.
Do you believe that hell is just a metaphor or a real place where souls cry out in eternal torment? Today, I'm going to reveal something that can completely change your perception. Imagine for a moment a reality where the fire never goes out, where the darkness is thicker than any shadow you've ever seen, a place where screams echo endlessly and despair is the only language spoken. What you know about hell may be just the tip of an iceberg that no one dares to explore. There are hidden truths that few have the courage to reveal. Some say that hell is just a concept created to scare. But what if I told you that I have seen things that defy all doubt? What if these revelations were so shocking that you would never look at your life the same way again? I'm not talking about made-up stories or urban legends. I'm talking about real experiences, about confessions that come from the depths of the unknown. Hell is not just a place of suffering. It is a warning, a reflection of the choices that many make without realizing it. It is a spiritual reality that surpasses anything the human mind can fully comprehend. In this video, you will be transported to a dimension where the truth is undeniable and the revelations are as disturbing as they are liberating. Every moment, thousands of people live as if hell doesn't exist, ignoring the signs, playing with traps that lead straight to it. Social networks, addictions, pride and resentment, it all seems harmless, but there are open doors that many don't see. Have you ever wondered how small decisions can have eternal consequences? I saw the consequences, and what I'm going to share today will make you reflect on every choice you've ever made. While many choose to ignore this reality, there are those who face the truth head-on. And the truth is this: hell is not a myth, and the price of living without spiritual purpose can be much greater than you imagine. The revelations you are about to hear are not just frightening. They are a wake-up call, an urgent wake-up call for anyone willing to open their eyes. When people talk about hell, many think of scary stories or images from movies. But I want you to know that what I am about to report is not fiction at all. I've been there. I saw with my own eyes souls trapped in chains, being consumed by something that is much more than fire. I heard the words no one ever wants to hear. You belong with us. And at that moment, everything changed. As terrible as it is, there is a purpose in sharing what I saw. These visions did not come to paralyze me, but to bring a warning. Hell is not just a physical place. It is an eternal sentence, a destiny that begins long before we cross the gates of death. And that's what we'll talk about today. Are you prepared to confront the truth? There is no way to sugarcoat the reality of what I saw. Every detail, every sound, every scene recorded in my memory is an invitation for you to rethink your life. Maybe you think you're immune, that this is just an exaggeration. But I'll tell you something that left me speechless. Hell is not selective. It is always waiting. And now, as those words echo, it's impossible not to feel the gravity of what's to come. Prepare yourself, because the revelations you are about to hear will leave you breathless. You are about to embark on a spiritual journey that could change everything you believe about good, evil, and what happens beyond this life. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you knows that this message is important. Before we continue with these shocking revelations, I want to ask you something very special. Write your prayer request here in the comments. No matter what your need is, an impossible challenge, a spiritual doubt, or a cry for your future, prayer has power, and today we will pray together. This is the time to seek, to connect with God, and allow Him to transform the impossible into reality. Prayer is the key that opens spiritual doors. It is the bridge between heaven and earth. Don't underestimate the power it has to bring peace, comfort, and most importantly, answers. When we pray, we move the heavens, and God hears every word, even those spoken in silence. You may be facing doubts or fears, but remember, that the first step to any change begins with a heart willing to seek. So, I invite you, leave your prayer request here. Let's pray for you, for your life, for your family, and for your dreams. We are not alone on this journey, and prayer is a form of unity and strength. Take advantage of this moment to open up and cry out, because God is attentive to our needs. Furthermore, I want to ask you something very simple, but that makes all the difference. If this message is touching your heart, click the like button right now. This helps more people to be reached by this very important message. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, sign up now and turn on the notification bell, because we have many other profound revelations that can transform your life. Here, we talk about spiritual truths that few dare to address, and you won't want to miss any details. Like, subscribe and share. Let's build a community of faith, prayer, and transformation together. Hell can be a frightening reality, but there is power in prayer and the union of people who sincerely seek God. Leave your prayer request in the comments now and prepare for what's to come. From the beginning, the search for the unknown has exerted a mysterious force on people. But for some, this attraction turns into a deep and irresistible calling. Thus began the journey of one who today carries revelations that few would dare share. He did not imagine that his curiosity and desire for spiritual answers would lead him to dive into the abyss of the supernatural, much less that these choices would put you in front of hell itself. He was an ordinary man, living amidst the doubts and desires that life inevitably presents. His world was filled with uncertainty. He constantly asked himself about the purpose of existence, about the line that separates good and evil, and, most importantly, about what really happens after death. The dissatisfaction growing inside him was like a black hole, sucking away every bit of hope and meaning he had left. Seeking to fill that void, he found paths that would take him to dark places, paths that many would avoid taking, but that he, in his thirst for answers, followed without hesitation. His approach to the occult began in a seemingly harmless way. Small experiments, readings of forbidden texts, and the search for rituals that promised power and knowledge were the first steps. The feeling of control, of being above human limitations, grew like a seductive illusion. He believed he was accessing hidden truths, uncovering secrets that the ordinary world was unable to understand. However, what he didn't know was that every small choice took him further away from the light, taking him down a path of no return. What started as curiosity became an obsession. Rituals, invocations, and secret pacts began to dominate his routine. He sought power and answers, but deep down, he was being consumed by something bigger and more dangerous than he could imagine. Shadows seemed to follow him, and warning signs began to appear in his life, in subtle but frightening ways. Disturbing dreams, voices in the silence of the night, and a constant feeling of being watched were just the beginning. He ignored these signs, believing they were part of the process of spiritual evolution he sought, until, on one specific night, everything changed. He remembers that moment clearly. There was a feeling of restlessness that I couldn't explain. The air seemed thicker, and the darkness of the night seemed to envelop him in an unusual way. He was alone, in his room, surrounded by the objects and symbols he used in his rituals. While meditating, something happened. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a presence. An inexplicable cold took over the environment, and he felt his soul being pulled into a reality that did not belong to this world. It was at that moment that he realized he had crossed a line he should never have crossed. The experiences that followed were intense and terrifying. He began to realize that he was not just dealing with spiritual forces, but that these forces had a personality, an intention. And this intention was not benevolent. It was as if something had marked him, as if he had become a target. The voices that used to whisper in the distance were now clear and direct. They said things he didn't want to hear, showing truths he wasn't prepared to accept. Every time he tried to retreat, he felt like he was trapped more deeply in the web he had created. Still, he didn't stop. There was something inside him that kept him from giving up. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the fear of facing that everything he believed in could be wrong. He was being drawn into an abyss, but he still couldn't see the extent of his fall. The call to the supernatural was stronger than anything else in his life, and he followed it, even though he didn't know where he would end up. His story is a reminder that the choices we make, no matter how small, have consequences. He believed he was in control, but in reality, he was being manipulated, led into something much bigger and much darker than he could have imagined. Have you ever wondered if something seemingly harmless could open doors that should never be opened? That's exactly what happened to him. And now, he bears the marks of an experience that changed his life forever. These words are not just a report, are a warning. Many of us ignore the signs, believing that evil is something far away, that it cannot reach us. But evil hides in things that seem small, in innocent curiosities, in choices we make without thinking. He doesn't knock on the door in an obvious way. He disguises himself, adapts, and attracts us. That's how it all started for him. And before he knew it, he was completely involved. His initial call to the supernatural was the first step on a journey that would take him to hell, not as a metaphor, but as a terrifying reality. Do you believe that hell can start here, with choices we make on a daily basis? If this question echoes in your mind, share your thoughts in the comments. Write, "I believe," or "I still have questions," so we can continue this discussion. I want to hear from you. From the moment he opened the doors to the supernatural, his life began to fall apart in ways he could never have predicted. What once seemed like a dangerous but controlled game now revealed itself as an overwhelming force that pulled him deeper and deeper into a spiritual abyss. He no longer had the control he sought so much. The power he believed he had acquired quickly turned into chains that bound him to a dark path, where the light became increasingly distant. Everything began to manifest in subtle but unmistakable ways. First, inner peace disappeared. Even in the most peaceful moments, he felt a constant anguish, a restlessness that consumed him. It was as if something was always there, watching, waiting for an opportunity to speak. What he didn't know was that the forces he had invoked were not just present. They had already taken over parts of his life, influencing his emotions, his thoughts, and even his decisions. Things around him began to crumble. Their relationships frayed quickly. He became distant, impatient, and dominated by inexplicable anger. Small arguments turned into explosive fights. The friends who were always by his side now moved away, unable to deal with the negative energy that seemed to emanate from him. He found himself increasingly isolated, but at the same time, he became convinced that this was part of his spiritual evolution. He believed that isolation was necessary to achieve absolute power, but in reality, it was the first sign of his downfall. The nights became even more disturbing. He had nightmares so vivid that he would often wake up panting, his body drenched in sweat. He dreamed of dark places where time seemed to stand still and where he was trapped, unable to escape. The voices in the dreams were clear and frightening, calling him by name, accusing him of things he didn't understand. He tried to ignore it, but the dreams began to intertwine with his reality. Sometimes he heard the same voices while he was awake, whispering in his ear, filling his mind with doubts and fears. The presence of these forces became even more evident in his home. Objects began to move on their own. Inexplicable noises echoed through the empty rooms, and shadows quickly passed from the corners of their eyes. He tried to justify these events as a figment of his imagination, But deep down, he knew something much bigger was happening. The atmosphere in the house has completely changed. The air felt heavy, as if something invisible was oppressing every inch of the place. Even people who visited him noticed that there was something strange, but they avoided commenting for fear of looking crazy. Despite this, he continued diving deeper. Curiosity turned into obsession. Each ritual he performed seemed to open a new level of knowledge, but it also brought with it a spiritual weight that he could barely bear. It was as if each step forward required a greater sacrifice. He began to realize that the forces surrounding him were not just offering power, they were exacting a price. The question was he willing to pay? One of the charges came in a devastating way. He started missing important things. Firstly, it was his health. Without explanation, he began to feel constant pain, a fatigue that did not disappear, even after nights of sleep. Doctor's appointments didn't point to anything out of the ordinary, but he knew something was wrong. Then he started losing financial opportunities. Projects that seemed promising suddenly failed, and his financial situation became increasingly tight. He saw his life crumble before his eyes, but instead of retreating, he believed it was part of the process. He convinced himself that, in the end, all the suffering would be worth it. Rock bottom was approaching quickly, and he couldn't realize it. There were times when he questioned whether he was on the right path, but the voices that once scared him now manipulated him. They convinced him that there was no going back, that he was already trapped, and that the only way out was to continue. These lies penetrated deeply into his mind, making him increasingly vulnerable to the forces he had allowed into his life. And then came the scariest episodes. During one of his rituals, something happened. He felt his body being taken over by a force that wasn't his. It wasn't just a feeling, it was real. He lost control over his movements, his voice, and even his thoughts. It was as if he were a spectator inside his own body. This experience left him panicked, but at the same time, he felt a strange familiarity. It was as if, as scary as it was, he was destined for this. By now, he was completely plunged into the abyss. There was no more peace, no control, no hope. Every time he tried to escape, it felt like something was pulling him even deeper. He realized that rock bottom wasn't just a place, it was a state of being. He had transformed into someone he didn't recognize, and what he saw and experienced in that state is what we will explore next. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe that small decisions can take us to spiritual rock bottom? Write "Decisions matter" in the comments if you believe this. Or, "I want to understand more," if this idea still doesn't make sense to you. I read every comment and want to hear what you have to say. Let's continue this journey together. Rock bottom seemed to have no end, but what he didn't know was that he was about to cross an even darker threshold. It was a night like so many others, filled with restlessness and an invisible weight that seemed to suffocate the environment. He had grown accustomed to the dark presences around him, the unexplainable noises, and the constant feeling of being watched. That night, however, something was different. Silence was not just an absence of sound, but a presence, something that filled the space with a suffocating density. He felt a shiver run down his spine, and, without knowing why, he realized something was about to happen. As he began another of his rituals, he was overcome by a feeling he had never experienced before. It was as if the air around him was ripped away, leaving him breathless as an invisible force pulled him away from his reality. The ground seemed to disappear beneath his feet, and suddenly he found himself plunged into a darkness so deep that it made space seem non-existent. There were no sounds, no light, just an absolute emptiness that seemed to devour his consciousness. He tried to scream, but his voice wouldn't come out. Despair took over, and it was then that he realized he was being transported to a place that transcended everything he knew. The transition was like falling into an endless abyss. Gravity seemed to act differently, as if he was being pulled in all directions at once. And then, suddenly, he saw it. Darkness gave way to a scene that defies description. Hell, he knew immediately, was not just an abstract idea or an invention to scare. It was there, before his eyes, and every detail confirmed that he had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. The first impact was visual. He saw rivers of fire, but it was no ordinary fire. The flames seemed alive, consuming everything around them without ever going out. There was a red glow on the horizon, as if the sky was perpetually on fire. The earth was cracked, exuding unbearable heat, and every crack seemed to spew toxic vapors. He tried to breathe, but the air was heavy, filled with the smell of sulfur and something worse, something he couldn't identify, but that made his stomach turn. What terrified him most, however, were the sounds. It wasn't just screams. They were deep laments, filled with pain and despair, as if every soul in that place was trapped in eternal suffering. These screams did not come from a specific place, but seemed to echo everywhere, entering his ears and penetrating his mind. He knew, with overwhelming certainty, that these souls were there because of choices they had made in life, and the terror of that realization was greater than anything he could imagine. He then noticed the figures. At first, they were just shadows, shapes that moved on the periphery of his vision. But as he progressed, he began to see them more clearly. They were demons, beings whose appearance defied all logic or description. They were deformed, as if their very existence was an affront to creation. Each one seemed to carry an aura of pure evil, radiating hatred and pleasure at seeing the suffering of the souls around them. They didn't attack him right away, but he felt their eyes fixed on him, as if they were analyzing every piece of his soul. And then, one of them approached. He was gigantic, with eyes that glowed like hot coals. His voice was deep and sharp, like the sound of metal being ripped apart. "You belong to us," he said. And those words echoed in her mind like a death sentence. The demon did not need to explain the meaning. He knew those words were true, that his choices had put him there, and that there was no escape. Fear overwhelmed him so much that he fell to his knees, unable to react. He was taken to a specific place, a valley where souls seemed to be thrown like trash, piled one on top of the other, without any distinction. Some cried, others screamed, and some just stared into space, as if they had already lost all ability to feel. He tried to look away, but he couldn't. It was as if that place wanted him to see every detail, for him to understand completely what it meant to be there. Suddenly, he felt something touch his mind. It wasn't an external voice, but something internal, like a thought that wasn't his. It was a feeling of complete abandonment, as if he was being ripped away from any connection with good, with hope, with light. He realized that hell was not only a place of physical torment, but also a spiritual one. It was the complete absence of everything that gave meaning to existence. He understood at that moment that this was the true punishment, not just suffering, but knowing that there was no longer any chance of redemption. And it was there, in this valley of despair, that he realized how much he had underestimated the impact of his choices. He saw that every small decision, every moment of pride, anger, or selfishness had taken him one step closer to that place. He wanted to scream, to ask for help, but he felt like his words would be absorbed into the void. All he could do was watch and feel as hell showed its true face. Can you imagine being in a place like this, where there is no hope, where all that is left is the echo of wrong choices? I want to know what you think. Write, "I choose the light" in the comments if you believe it is possible to change destiny through the decisions we make today. Or write, "I want to understand more" if you are still looking for answers. I'm here to read and walk along with you on this journey. When he believed that the terror had already reached its limit, he realized that he was just beginning to understand the vastness of that place. Hell was not simply a single dimension of suffering. It was a composition of scenarios that defied all logic, each more terrible than the last, each designed to amplify the torment of those who found themselves there. The first place that impacted him was a large, dark abyss. He didn't know how he had been brought there. Time and space seemed to work differently, as if he were just a spectator, led by invisible forces. However, he knew that nothing he was about to see would be easy to bear. The abyss seemed infinite. He looked down and saw something he couldn't immediately understand. It was as if the darkness had a life of its own, moving and pulsing, emitting sounds that seemed like a collective lament. There were millions, perhaps billions of souls, falling endlessly into an endless void. They screamed for help, but the echo of their screams was swallowed by the immensity of the abyss. He felt the weight of those voices as if they were chains tied to his own body. There was no ground in that place, only the feeling of eternal falling. And he understood that this was the fate of many people who had scorned the chance to live in the light. Soon, he was taken to another scenario. This one seemed more structured, almost like a city, but a city in ruins, consumed by flames that never went out. The buildings were deformed, made of materials that did not belong to the physical world. The streets were filled with souls dragging heavy chains, while demonic figures watched their every movement with expressions of evil delight. He realized that this place was different from the abyss. There, the torments were calculated. Each person seemed to be burdened with a specific weight, which represented their sins and choices in life. He observed a woman who appeared to be trying to free herself from a huge rock tied to her body. She cried incessantly, while a grotesque creature laughed at her, poking her with something that looked like a spear. It was a scene of utter despair, where the punishment seemed to align directly with what each soul had done. As he walked away from this city, he was led to an even more terrifying area. It was a valley surrounded by gloomy mountains where the air was even heavier. He saw figures that appeared to be buried up to their necks in a substance similar to mud, but which was boiling, emitting an unbearable smell. The souls that were there tried to scream, but their voices were muffled by the slowly moving liquid, as if it wanted to consume them completely. Every time one of them tried to lift its head, it was pushed back again by shadowy hands that emerged from the depths. That valley was what he understood to be a place of pride, where those who lived their lives filled with pride and selfishness now faced the weight of their own actions. But what really stopped him was the next place he visited. It was a river of fire, but not as he imagined. This river didn't just burn. He had something more. The flames seemed to move as if they had a life of their own, like dancing serpents, and he heard screams coming from within them. It was then that he realized that those flames were not just consuming bodies, they were burning souls, reaching something much deeper. He saw figures struggling to get out of the river, but every time they tried to escape, demonic hands pulled them back into the depths. Some of these figures seemed to be carrying pieces of something that glowed brightly, as if they were fragments of their own souls, corroded by fire. This was a torment he knew no human being would be able to endure for long. The journey finally took him to a place where he felt his own evil was more palpable. It was some kind of gigantic cave, with walls that seemed alive, pulsing and writhing as if they were flesh. The environment emitted low, guttural sounds that sounded like moans. He saw thrones of black stone, where imposing figures, clearly superior to the demons he had seen before, watched everything around them. They didn't move much, but their mere presence made the room shake. He realized that these beings were the architects of all that suffering. They didn't just oversee hell, they were part of it, as if their existence was intertwined with the very essence of that place. What he noticed in all these places was that each one was a representation of human choices and behaviors. These weren't just random punishments. They were manifestations of the spiritual consequences of a life lived far from the light, far from God. He saw people who were trapped in the cycle of their own sin, unable to escape because they had ignored the signs while they were still alive. Now, I want to ask you, if these places were real, would you be able to identify the choices in your life that could lead you to them? Write in the comments, "I want to protect myself," if you believe it is possible to escape these traps through conscious choices. Or, if you're still trying to understand more, write, "I need clarity." Your comment is very important, because we are together on this journey of discovery and reflection. As he continued to be led through this terrifying scenario, it became clear that hell was not just a place of torment, but also a complex network of traps that trapped souls in endless cycles of suffering. He began to realize that the enemy's traps were not just to capture souls after death, but to prepare them from the beginning while they were still alive. Every place he had visited seemed to be a reflection of the choices people made every day. Often without realizing, they were being drawn into something much bigger and more dangerous. He saw how the enemy worked with a precise strategy, planting seeds of sin in the most common situations. One of these traps, which he could clearly observe, was the seduction of pride. Pride presented itself as something harmless, almost like a virtue, leading people to believe that they were self-sufficient, that they did not need God or anyone else. It was subtle but deadly. He saw people who had lived their lives based on their own strengths, believing that they were in absolute control of everything. However, in that place, the control they thought they had turned into chains that bound them. Every selfish decision they had made, every time they refused to forgive or ask for help, now weighed on them like unbearable burdens. Another trap he witnessed was the deception of the incessant search for momentary pleasures. This was one of the enemy's most effective strategies, as it offered small doses of immediate satisfaction, masking the eternal consequences. He saw people trapped in a cycle of desires and addictions that were never satisfied. They constantly sought to fill the void with fleeting pleasures, but all they found was more pain. In hell, this incessant desire continued. The souls there were tormented by hunger and thirst, not for food or water, but for something they could never reach. It was as if the desire itself was the punishment, a constant reminder of how they had been deceived. One of the most impactful scenes was when he saw how distraction traps were used. The enemy didn't need to convince people that hell didn't exist. He just needed to distract them enough so they never thought about it. He saw how people spent their lives chasing after fleeting things, money, fame, approval from others, while ignoring the things that really mattered. In hell, these souls were tormented by a sense of regret so deep it was palpable. They remembered all the opportunities they had to change, all the warnings they ignored, and this realization was a greater torment than any physical pain. He also witnessed how the enemy used doubt as a powerful weapon. Doubt was a small seed, but it could grow into total disbelief. He saw people who had started with small questions, but who, instead of seeking answers from God, turned to other paths. These doubts led them to question everything, even the existence of absolute truth. In hell, these souls were consumed by confusion. They wandered in circles, unable to find any direction, as if they were eternally lost in a maze of uncertainty. Another devastating aspect of the enemy's traps that he witnessed was emotional manipulation. He saw how the enemy used hurt and resentment to create divisions among people. Small offenses that accumulated over time turned into walls that separated friends, families, and even the person of God. In hell, these sorrows became fuel for suffering. Souls were tormented by memories of times when they could have chosen to forgive, but didn't. It was as if the weight of every resentment they carried in life turned into a fire that consumed them eternally. Finally, he saw how the enemy's most dangerous weapon was apathy. Apathy was like a silent poison, which made people simply not care about anything other than themselves. They didn't care about good or evil, right or wrong, light or dark. Apathy made them insensitive, blind to what was around them. In hell, this apathy turned into a crushing emptiness. He saw souls that seemed completely paralyzed, as if they no longer had the will to fight or even scream. They had given up everything, including themselves. And this was the enemy's greatest triumph. As he observed all of this, it became clear that the enemy's traps were not obvious. They were carefully designed to appear harmless, even attractive. It was as if each person was drawn into their own personalized trap, based on their weaknesses and desires. The enemy didn't need to push anyone to hell. He simply created the conditions for each person to set themselves on this path on their own. Now, I want you to reflect with me. Can you identify which traps are around you? Maybe it's pride, distraction, or even that doubt that insists on appearing at the most unexpected moments. Write in the comments, "I choose to resist," if you believe it is possible to escape these traps. Or write, "I need strength," if you feel like you're still struggling with some of them. Let's share experiences and help each other identify these strategies. Because the first defense against the enemy is to recognize his methods. I'm reading every comment and want to know what you think. Amidst the absolute chaos and suffocating darkness of that place, he no longer knew who he was or how he had gotten there. His mind was filled with a whirlwind of emotions: fear, guilt, regret, and an overwhelming sense of abandonment. All he could hear were the incessant screams of tormented souls and the muffled sound of the chains that bound them. He felt the weight of his own choices like an invisible but crushing cloak, covering him with a cold that seemed to emanate from within his own soul. It was at that moment, when he had already lost any hope of finding a way out or relief, that something extraordinary happened. At first, it was just a feeling. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but in contrast to the oppressive surroundings, it was like a gentle breeze in the middle of a fiery desert. He felt a change in the air around him, as if the density suffocating him had eased for an instant. At first, he thought it was just an illusion, a cruel trick of his mind trying to find refuge in the midst of all this torment. But then, he noticed something he couldn't deny. A light began to appear on the horizon. It was no ordinary light. It was not like the dull, evil glow he had seen in the eyes of demons or in the flames of rivers of fire. It was something different, something that radiated peace and strength at the same time. The light seemed small in the distance, but as he watched it, he realized that it was getting closer, growing, taking over the space. And as the light grew brighter, he began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He tried to move toward her, but his legs wouldn't respond. It was as if he were trapped, as if the invisible chains of hell were holding him in place. Even so, he couldn't take his eyes off that light. The closer she got, the more he felt something was changing inside him. It was as if every scream around him was being muffled, every shadow was being pushed away, and every weight on his soul was being slowly lifted. When the light finally reached him, he was completely taken over by its presence. It wasn't just something he saw, it was something he felt, something that penetrated the deepest corners of his being. He was enveloped by a warmth that didn't burn, but comforted, like the sun's rays on a cold morning. For the first time, he felt like he was no longer alone. The light was not just light. It was a presence he couldn't explain, but he recognized immediately. It was as if his soul knew who he was, even if his mind couldn't fully comprehend it. And then, he heard the voice. It wasn't like the voices he had heard before, voices of mockery, of condemnation, of despair. This voice was different. It was powerful. but at the same time gentle. She was firm, but full of compassion. "You are not forgotten," the voice said. "I was with you the whole time." Those words hit him like a bolt of lightning, shattering something inside him that he didn't even know was there. He began to cry, not from fear or despair, but from relief. He felt that, for the first time, he had been seen, truly seen, and that despite everything he had done, there was still hope for him. The light began to reveal more than just his surroundings. She revealed to him things that were hidden in her own heart. He saw your mistakes, your choices, your moments of selfishness and pride. But instead of feeling condemnation, he felt a deep desire to change. He realized that every time he had ignored the signs, every time he had chosen the wrong path, he was walking away not just from God, but from himself, from the person he was created to be. The presence of light also brought a message. It wasn't just an experience to comfort him or pull him out of his torment. It was a calling. He knew at that moment that he had been spared for a reason, that everything he had experienced, all the pain, all the darkness, would not be in vain. "Come back," the voice said. "Go back and tell the world what you saw. Show them that there is still time, that there is still hope, that there is still light." These words weren't just a command. They were an invitation. He felt like he was being given something he had never imagined, a second chance. The light began to envelop him completely, and he felt as if he were being lifted out of that terrible place. He didn't know how, but he felt like he was being transformed. The weight he carried was gone, and in its place was a feeling of lightness, of freedom. He knew that this experience had changed everything, that he would never be the same. But he also knew that with this transformation came responsibility. He needed to share what he had seen, so that others wouldn't fall into the same traps he did, so that others could find the light before it was too late. Now, I ask, do you believe that even in the deepest darkness, there is a chance for transformation? If this story touched your heart, write in the comments, "I choose the light." Or, if you feel like you're still searching for answers, write, "I want to find hope." I'm here to read your story and continue this journey with you. When the light finally lifted him out of that abyss of darkness and pain, he felt as if he were being transported to a completely different dimension, a place where the weight of hell could no longer reach him. The peace that invaded his heart was indescribable, something he had never experienced before, not even in the happiest moments of his life. But this peace didn't come alone. It brought with it a series of revelations that he knew he could never forget. It was as if everything he had experienced up until that moment had been just a prelude to what was about to be revealed. He not only saw and heard, he understood. Every word, every image, every sensation was charged with a deep meaning, as if they were being engraved directly into your soul. The first revelation he received was about the reality of human choice. He understood that no one gets to hell by accident, that every soul he saw in that place had, in some way, chosen to be there. This did not mean that people consciously desired damnation, but that their actions, thoughts, and decisions throughout their lives built the path that led them there. He saw how small, seemingly insignificant choices had the power to open spiritual doors that could influence an entire trajectory. It was a clear warning. It is not just the great sins that keep us away from the light, but the small concessions, the moments of indifference, the maybe later that we so often postpone when it comes to seeking God. Another impactful revelation was about the strength of divine mercy. He saw how, even in the face of people's wrong choices, God always offered ways back, warning signs and opportunities for redemption. He was shown specific moments in the lives of some of the souls who were in hell, moments when they had received clear signs, chances to change their lives, but which they chose to ignore. It was then that he understood something that marked him deeply. Hell was not just a punishment, but also a consequence. God does not force anyone to be with him. It's a choice. And when people choose to live apart from God, even while they are alive, they are actually beginning to experience what it means to be separated from the light. He also received clear insight into the weather. Time, as we know it, does not exist on the spiritual plane in the same way as it does here on earth. In hell, he realized that time was a prison, an endless cycle of pain and regret. But in the presence of light, time transformed into something completely different. It was no longer a straight line, but an eternity of peace and plenitude. He understood that every second we spend on earth is a gift, an opportunity to choose our eternal destiny. He was shown that the biggest deception that the enemy implants in the human mind is the idea that there is plenty of time, when, in fact, no one knows the day or hour when everything can change. Another revelation that left him deeply impacted was about the power of forgiveness. He saw how forgiveness, both what we receive and what we offer to others, plays a fundamental role in our spiritual journey. He was shown how resentment and hurt are like spiritual anchors that bind us to the past, preventing us from moving forward. Many of the souls he saw in hell were trapped because of their pride, unable to forgive others or themselves. He realized that forgiveness is not just an emotional decision, but an act of spiritual liberation that can literally change the course of our lives. Perhaps the most powerful revelation he received was about God's love. He saw that God's love is not just a concept or an emotion, but a living force, something as real as the air we breathe. He was shown how this love is available to everyone, but that we are often the ones who choose to reject it. He saw how God's love has the power to transform even the most impossible situations, to restore what was broken and bring light to the darkest places. But this love cannot be imposed. It needs to be accepted. He understood that this is why God never gives up on us, even when we are at rock bottom. As long as we are still alive, there is still hope. These revelations did not come without a purpose. He knew they had been given to him not just for his own transformation, but for him to share with the world. He understood that he had a mission: to alert people, help them see the consequences of their choices, and show that there is always a way back to the light. Every word he heard, every image he saw, was engraved in his soul in a way that he could never forget, even if he wanted to. He knew he would need to have courage to talk about these things, that he would face criticism, doubts, and even rejection. But he also knew he had no other choice. He had been rescued for a purpose, and now his life was dedicated to fulfilling it. I want you to think about this. How many times have you felt like you received a sign but chose to ignore it? How many times have you thought about changing something in your life but postponed that decision? Write in the comments, "I choose the light," if you believe it is time to act and take control of your spiritual journey. Or, if you still feel like you need more understanding, write, "I want to learn more." Each comment is a step, and I am here to walk alongside you on this journey of revelation and transformation. After experiencing what he could never have imagined possible, the lessons he brought from hell began to fit together like pieces of a puzzle. He realized that hell is not just a final destination, but a reflection of the choices we make here every day. Every decision, every thought, every attitude can bring us closer to the light or push us away from it. It is not something distant, reserved for after death. It is something that begins now, in the details of everyday life, in the moments when we choose to ignore spiritual truths in exchange for comfort, distraction, or pride. He understood that hell is built one step at a time, in the small concessions we make throughout life. One of the most striking lessons he brought was about the value of time. In hell, he saw how souls were tormented by deep regret, an insatiable desire to go back and redo their choices. They just wanted a minute, a single opportunity to ask for forgiveness, to change something they had done or failed to do. But they couldn't. Time was like a door that had been closed forever, leaving them trapped in an eternal cycle of pain and regret. He realized that while we are alive, each day is a new chance, a gift that can be used to bring us closer to the light and transform our lives. However, most people treat time as if it were infinite, wasting it on unimportant things, ignoring what really matters. Another powerful lesson was about the importance of our words and actions. He saw how words spoken thoughtlessly, attitudes guided by selfish impulses, and decisions made without consideration for others can have far greater consequences than we imagine. In hell, these actions were amplified, showing their true impact. Words that hurt someone, hurts that were ignored and broken, promises turned into torments that souls were forced to relive over and over again. He understood that every word and every action counts, that every choice leaves a mark on our spirit and that of others. It was a powerful reminder that we need to be intentional in everything we do, living with awareness and compassion. Furthermore, he learned about the fragility of human pride. Pride, which is so often seen as a virtue or a sign of strength, has been revealed to be one of the most dangerous traps. He saw how souls who lived their lives proudly, refusing to forgive or ask for help, ended up trapped in a cycle of isolation and pain. They were so focused on themselves that they failed to see the need for God or the importance of truly connecting with others. In hell, pride was like an invisible cage that kept them trapped, unable to find any kind of redemption. He understood that true strength lies in humility, in recognizing our limitations and seeking help when necessary. The lesson about the power of forgiveness was also something that completely changed his perspective. He saw how unforgiveness, both for others and for oneself, was one of the heaviest chains that kept souls imprisoned. He realized that forgiving is not something we do just for others, but for ourselves, to free ourselves from the weight that hurt and resentment place on our lives. He understood that while we carry hurts, we are holding on to the past and hindering our own spiritual growth. In hell, lack of forgiveness was a fire that never went out, burning souls from the inside without ever consuming their essence. One of the most pressing lessons was about how the world's distractions keep us from what really matters. He saw how the enemy uses distractions, social media, overwork, status seeking, to keep us busy with things that ultimately have no eternal value. These distractions rob us of time we could use to seek God, connect with our families, or reflect on our own lives. He realized that the greatest danger of these distractions is not only that they take us away from the light, but that they make us insensitive to the need for change. It's easy to ignore the warning signs when we're constantly busy with the noise of the world. Finally, he learned that love is the most powerful force there is. He saw how God's love was able to reach even the darkest places, bringing hope and transformation. But he also saw how souls who rejected this love were condemned to live in complete darkness, not because God had abandoned them, but because they had chosen to turn away from Him. He understood that love is not just an emotion, but a decision, a daily choice to live in a way that reflects God's light in the world. He realized that, as long as we are alive, there is still time to choose love, to let it guide our actions and lead us back to the light. Now, I want you to reflect with me on these lessons. Have you ever wondered how small everyday choices can impact your spiritual destiny? Write in the comments, "Every choice matters," if you believe this, or "I want to understand more," if these ideas are still new to you. Share your thoughts, because your story can help others see the value in their own choices. I'm here to read each comment and walk with you on this journey of transformation. After everything he saw, heard, and understood, a truth began to echo in his soul with indescribable clarity. Nothing changes without reflection and action. He understood that spiritual transformation does not happen by chance. It requires courage to look within, to face our choices, our failures, and the opportunities we let pass by. What he experienced was more than a personal revelation. It was an urgent call to all who still have time, all who are still alive, to reconnect with what really matters. And that is why now he has become a messenger, not to condemn, but to awaken. He realized that the first step to any change is reflection. The question he echoes to this day is, have you ever stopped to think about what is really moving your life? It's easy to get swallowed up by routine, daily problems and distractions that surround us. But if we don't stop to reflect, how will we know if we are on the right path? He realized that most people live on autopilot, leaving the most important decisions for later, believing that there will be an ideal time to change. But, as he saw with his own eyes, this is one of the greatest illusions that the enemy plants in our minds. The right time is not tomorrow, it is now. Prayer is the bridge that connects us to this transformation. He understood that prayer is not just an empty ritual or a repetition of words, but a living and sincere conversation with God, a space where we can expose ourselves completely without fear of judgment. He saw how many people avoid praying because they believe they are not worthy, or because they think God will not hear them. But what he learned is that prayer is precisely for those who feel lost, broken, and aimless. It is in this space of honesty that God manifests himself, not as a harsh judge, but as a loving Father, ready to guide us back to the light. He also understood that prayer is not just talking, but listening. He realized that many people get frustrated with prayer because they expect immediate answers or visible signs. But what he learned is that God speaks in many ways, and most of them require silence and attention. Prayer takes us away from the surface and takes us to a deeper level, where we can see our lives from a new perspective. He saw, in the presence of that divine light, that prayer is the most powerful tool for resisting the enemy's traps and for transforming our lives from the inside out. As he reflected on all of this, he also understood that prayer is not something we do just for ourselves. He saw that there is a special power in intercessory prayer, when we pray for those we love, for those who have hurt us, and even for those we do not know. He realized that every prayer has a spiritual impact, even when we don't see the results immediately. In hell, he saw souls who lamented that they had never prayed for their families, that they had never used their voice to intercede for others. It was a powerful lesson. Prayer is not just a personal act. It is an act of love and connection that transcends time and space. Now, he makes an invitation to everyone who hears his testimony. Take a moment to reflect on your own life, not just about the mistakes of the past, but about the present, about the opportunities that are before you now. Ask yourself, what have I left for later? Who do I need to forgive? What choices do I need to change before it's too late? He always repeats that reflection is the beginning of transformation. But prayer is the fuel that keeps this transformation alive. When sharing these lessons, he always reinforces that prayer does not need to be complex or full of formalities. It can start with a simple phrase, such as, "God, I need help," or "Lord, guide my steps." He saw that God is not expecting perfection, but sincerity. He learned that each prayer is a step towards the light, a movement that takes us out of the darkness and closer to the truth. And that's why he's so insistent that people pray, not because it's a religious obligation, but because it's an opportunity to reconnect our souls with the original purpose for which we were created. If you are hearing this now, this is the time to act. Don't leave it for later. Start reflecting on where you are today and where your choices are taking you. You may feel like you're far from where you want to be, but the good news is that it's never too late to change while you still have life. Take a few minutes out of your day to pray, to ask for direction, to surrender to the light. He learned that every small step counts. and that God is just waiting for a move on our part to act in our lives. Now, I want to hear from you. Write in the comments, "I accept the invitation," if you are willing to reflect and pray today. Or write, "I need strength," if you feel like you're still struggling to take that step. Share your story, because your experience could be the beginning of a transformation, not just for you, but for anyone who reads it. Remember, we are on this journey together, and every prayer has power. I am here, reading every word, walking with you, and praying for your life. If you've made it this far, I want to tell you that none of this is by chance. There's a reason you watched until the end, and I believe God is working in your life in ways you may not even realize yet. This video was made with the purpose of touching hearts, of bringing light where there is darkness, of offering hope where there seems to be no way out. So we want to know, how did this message impact you? Comment below, "I felt God's voice in this video," and share how these words spoke to your soul. Your story can not only be an inspiration to others, but also the beginning of something transformative in your life. Every comment you leave here is a living testimony of how God is at work. And when you share, you not only strengthen your own faith, but you also help spread this message to those who need to hear it. Perhaps your experience is the impetus someone needs to seek change, to begin a journey of reflection and prayer. This comment space is more than a simple exchange of words. It is a community of faith and transformation. Now, I want to make a special invitation. Subscribe to the channel so that we can continue together on this spiritual journey. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any content, because each video is created to bring revelations, uplifting messages, and moments of deep connection with God. And, of course, don't forget to leave a like. When you like, it's not just a simple gesture. You are supporting this mission of bringing the Word and messages of hope to as many people as possible. Your engagement makes all the difference. And before you go, remember, this is just the beginning. God has more to reveal, and the next video is already on the final screen, waiting for you. There, we will delve even deeper into this conversation and explore truths that can transform your life. Click now to watch and continue with us on this journey of faith and transformation. May God abundantly bless your life, your home, and every decision you make from now on. We are praying for you, and we know great things are coming. Go in peace, and may God's light always be with you.